Social expectation drowns us all inside. What you have should be what I want, 'cause what I have just ain't alright. The clothes I wear, the way I comb my hair, how I live, oh I don't care.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi wa kafa. Wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina astafa. Allahumma aghnina bil ilm wa zayyinna bil hilm wa akrimna bit taqwa wa jammilna bil afiyah. Allahumma ati anfusana taqwaha wa zakkiha anta khairu man zakkaha anta waliyuha wa maulaha. Allahumma aghnina bil ilm wa zayyinna bil hilm wa akrimna bit taqwa wa jammilna bil afiyah. Allahumma barik lana fil maut wa fima ba'dal maut. Rabbana zidna ilma. Rabbi zidni ilma. Amma ba'd. The last thing we spoke about is that sometimes people praise you. The Sheikh said, Al-Iskandari, Abul Hassan, Abul Fadl Al-Iskandari, Nawwar Allahu marqadahu wa nafa'ana bi ulumihim amin. Sometimes people praise you. You say, wow, such a good Muslim, righteous person, you're so pious, you do this, you do that. How do we act? How does a salik act? Because these lessons, these are not talks, these are lessons. Each topic is a lesson which is ready to be put into practice. The Sheikh said, when your Maula, when your master activates the tongues of people with such praises upon you, which you do not deserve, and you know you don't deserve them, you know your own faults, you know your own weaknesses, then moisten your tongue with such praise which he deserves. Allahu Akbar. When people praise you, it in reality is the effect of Allah Ta'ala activating their tongues to praise you. He is activating their tongues to praise you. If Allah Ta'ala employs the tongues of people to laud on you praises which you do not deserve, you know yourself, then it behoves you to offer then in return such praise to that pure being which is befitting to him. The praise is not befitting to me, but I should offer praise which is befitting to him. Do not praise those who are praising you. Their praise, in reality, is Allah's veil of concealment. So beautifully put. Their praise is in reality Allah's veil of concealment, satari, which hides your defects from others. Allah is really hiding your faults from others. When they praise you, it's a veil He has put. Alhamdulillah. Therefore, do not become trapped by the praises of people. Now, this one here is so deep. In sin, when a person sins, he is involved in some act of sinning, adultery or wine drinking, disobedience of Allah. The Nafs gets pleasure in that. So in sin, the pleasure for the Nafs is overt. It's quite open. No big sort of explanation for that. And in obedience, wow, in obedience, the Nafs takes its share too, you know. Even in obedience, the Nafs does take its share. In obedience, the pleasure of the Nafs is covert, hidden. So in sin, the pleasure of the Nafs is overt and open. And in obedience, don't feel your Nafs not there in obedience too. In obedience, the pleasure of the Nafs is covert and hidden. But you know the bad thing about this is that the remedy for an ailment which is hidden is difficult. If you know a disease and the disease is open, the disease can be treated. But the remedy and the cure for an ailment and a sickness which is hidden It's so difficult. Maulana explains this, the commentary. We have 3 stages of the nafs. The first stage is when the nafs is ammara, very evil. It is the home of sins and desires and evils. Effort is made, it goes up to the stage of lawama. Effort is made, it goes on to the stage of Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'inna. But as long as the nafs has not reached the stage of mutma'inna, where it is peaceful, quiet, tranquil, in the presence of Allah, unity, nisbat, wasl, as long as the nafs has not reached the stage of mutma'inna, it will interfere in every act. Always remember that. Once it has reached it, it's going to interfere in every act, whether it be tabligh, gosh, dars, tadris, salat, zikr, ibadat, khutbah, bayan. Once the nafs has reached the stage of mutma'inna, it will interfere in every act. Be it ta'at, be it obedience, or be it ma'asiyat, be it sin. So its interference, the interference of the nafs in ma'asiyah, in sin, is plainly evident. It's overt. The nafs derives full pleasure in sin, maximum pleasure in sin. The nafs derives pleasure. And just remember, every time the nafs is deriving pleasure, the soul is becoming weaker. Despite its knowledge of divine chastisement, the nafs knows, it knows about divine chastisement. Despite its knowledge of divine chastisement, the nafs perpetrates the sin. Because of the pleasure it derives, it perpetrates the sin. But it knows of the punishment. And this is something which is overt, it's open, no big explanation for this. The nafs does not refrain from staking its claim of pleasure in even obedience. It doesn't refrain from staking its claim of pleasure in even obedience. How? But it is too difficult to understand this plot of the nafs. It is covert operation here. It is generally understood that the nafs has no share in ta'at. We think so. It's generally understood. The nafs has no share in obedience. Because obedience is difficult on the nafs and detestable to the nafs. Hence, obedience is in conflict with the desires and the wishes of the nafs. This is generally understood. It's true to a certain extent. It should be well understood that in spite of the difficulty of thought, in spite of the difficulty of obedience, in spite of that, the nafs does derive pleasure therein. In acts of obedience, the nafs does derive pleasure, in spite of the difficulty. In some persons is found, for example, love for fame. Some person is found what? Love for fame. So he is researching and doing khutbahs and bayans and lectures or what, because he wants to be known as a top alim or a top scholar. But he's involved in good acts of obedience or a big dai. So in some people is found a love for fame and would like to be known as the biggest mufti in Central America or in South America, or the top alim or the top dai or whatever. Fame. Some people hanker after that and they are involved in obedience, but they're not seeing the covert operation of the nafs behind it. In some people, is show, riyah, they like to show off, riyah. Even if the ibadat is performed initially with ikhlas and sincerity, a person may start it with sincerity, But the nafs doesn't leave any act alone. Once the nafs reach mutma'inna, it doesn't leave any act alone. The nafs then contaminates. You may start it with ikhlas. The nafs contaminates it with riya, show, and with hubbija, love for status and love for fame. The nafs contaminates it. That is why our elders, we think the principle that when you return from gush, to do istighfar. When you do any act, do istighfar. Because it's possible that my intention wasn't pure. That's why our scholars have said, before you do something, ask yourself, why am I doing it? What's your niyat? And when you're doing it, ask yourself now, while doing it, why am I doing it? And when you have finished, why have I done it? And then do istighfar. وَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ. Some people believe that the pleasure and the sweetness experienced in ibadah are the goal to strive for. They believe this is the goal. To reach such a stage where you could get joy and sweetness and pleasure in ibadah. And that's a good thing, because some people get it in sin. That's a good thing. When a man reaches a stage where he gets his enjoyment in muraqabah, meditation, zikr, and obedience, it is good, but that is not the goal. That's not the aim. It's not the objective. The sign of this misconception is that the nafs induces man to rush forward, to rush towards the form of ibadah. This is the sign of the misconception. The nafs induces man to rush forward, to rush towards that form of ibadah in which it derives greater pleasure. And that's how the nafs takes its share. It induces him to go to that type of ibadah in which he gets greater pleasure. It will constrain one to refrain from other types of ibadah. Even if these types of ibadah are fard, it will cause him to refrain from those acts of ibadah, other acts of ibadah, even though they may be fard. You know why? Since the nafs does not derive pleasure therein. Example, through examples things become easier. Example, a man performs nafil salat in abundance and he enjoys the nafil salat. He enjoys tahajjud. He enjoys his nafil salat. Nafil after nafil. But you know what? He refrains from paying zakat. He doesn't pay no zakat. And the nafs induces him, yeah man, read more nafil. Because he doesn't get no pleasure from paying zakat. And that's how the nafs takes its pleasure even in obedience. And it's very covert. This indicates, so he experiences pleasure in nafil salah, but not in zakat. This indicates that in his performance of nafil salat, what does that indicate? The nafs derives some pleasure, and that this person searches for the pleasure of the nafs, not for the pleasure of Allah Ta'ala. This is a sign that he is searching for the pleasure of his nafs, and he is not searching for the pleasure of Allah Ta'ala. If he was interested in Allah's pleasure, he would not abstain from paying zakat. Thus, the nafs has its share, even in ibadat, even in worship, the nafs has its share. Although the operation of the nafs in ibadat and worship is extremely well concealed, very covert, but the people of insight, the mashayikh, are able to fathom it and to understand it. When an ailment and a sickness is concealed, its remedy is difficult on account of diagnosis being difficult. When even awareness of the existence of the disease is lacking, we don't even know that we are sick from that. When even awareness of the disease is lacking, and the person is considered to be spiritually healthy, he thinks I'm so spiritually healthy, then the disease becomes incurable. Ma'adallah. So therefore, continuing this point, when there is ambiguity and doubt regarding two acts, there are two acts of ibadah, making it difficult to decide the best option, then opt for the act which is more difficult on the nafs. The haqq is more difficult on the nafs. Always know haqq is more difficult on the nafs. So opt for that option which is more difficult on the nafs. Explanation. When one experiences uncertainty in the choice of one of two mustahab acts, this is mustahab, that's also mustahab, but I don't know which one to choose. Or he experiences uncertainty in some jaiz acts. They are all lawful acts. Now which one should I do? Lawful acts. Then it is necessary to reflect in order to establish which act is more difficult and displeasing to the nafs. For example, a man comes in the masjid, he has 15 minutes left for Isha Salat. The 4 rakats of Isha before, the 4 rakats of Sunnah before Isha is Gair Muakkada. It's not emphasized. So it's mustahab if we do it. But the nafs, so now he wants to know whether I should perform the 4 rakats of the Sunnah before Isha, which is Gair Muakkada, not really emphasized, or should I sit down and read Quran? If the nafs induces him to read Quran and the 4 rakats becomes more difficult, know that the nafs getting pleasure and he's doing even ibadat for the pleasure of his nafs and not Allah. So always opt for that which is more difficult in the nafs, then a person progresses. Otherwise it's so covert, you don't know what's going on. So adopt the act which is more displeasing to the nafs. Persons has some free time now. Should I do some zikr tasbih or should I read Quran? But the nafs wants the tasbih to be done, because for Quran, I have to go and I have to perform wuzu, I have to go and sit down, I have to open the Quran, read, and I ain't really getting too much pleasure, but I gain more pleasure in zikr. All is nafs playing off there, but in a very covert way. Alright? Another example. It's time for class, tafsir of Holy Quran, Allah's Kalam. But then, should I go on a gush now? Or should I sit down in the class? Alright? Because 2 of them is under jaiz, mustahab. The nafs says here what? I get more enjoyment in what? In going out and gush now. So let me go out and gush. Again more. Guys, nafs. It's harder now for me to sit down in the class and sit down and gain some knowledge, and that's harder on the nafs. All that, it is so covert, and we don't understand what's happening. Adopt the act which is more displeasing to the nafs. The act which is better for this person, the act which will be better will be that act which is more difficult on the nafs. The nature of the nafs is jahal, ignorance. Nafs is very ignorant. It therefore always searches for things which are pleasurable to it, while the nafs flees from things which are beneficial for it. The nafs likes jahalat. So then, why should I go and sit down in a class to learn tajweed, or to learn Quran, or to sit down in the tafsir class, or sit down in a dars? The nature of the nafs is ignorance, jahalat. It therefore always searches for things which are pleasurable to it, while the nafs flees and runs away from things which are beneficial for it. Before going to sleep at night, it is sunnah to sleep with wuzu. Alright? It's also sunnah to recite your Fatima, tasbih, and some du'as and thing. So, the nafs say, boy, me feeling to make no wuzu na. I go sit down and I'm lying down on my bed and recite all the du'as and things, but he ain't making no wuzu. It's better you go and make the wudu, because it's harder on the nafs. Then you know you're on the right track. But these are things concerning that which is nafil, optional, lawful, mustahab. Because in farz you don't have a choice. Farz are at certain times So we don't get mixed up with that. The mix-up comes in with mustahab and jaiz and lawful stuff. The hamd and the thana of Allah Ta'ala prevent man from gratitude to his nafs. Never ever show gratitude to your nafs. You know, like somebody do you some big favor, ihsan, and you're grateful. Never show gratitude to your nafs. But how can we not show gratitude to our nafs? The hamd, praising Allah, the thana, the praises of Allah Ta'ala, these things prevent man from gratitude to his nafs and prevent him from honoring his nafs. Honoring his nafs. The thought of fulfilling the hukuk and the rights of Allah prevents from the remembrance of nafsani pleasures. The thought of fulfilling the rights of Allah, hukukullah, this thought prevents from the remembrance of nafsani pleasures. Commentary of this, because the Shaykh speaks in short messages, so deep they need to be expounded. Beautiful habits and virtuous attributes are purely the fadl of Allah. Always remember that. Beautiful habits. If a person has nice, good habits, he has virtuous attributes, they are purely the fadl and the grace of Allah. Always remember the ayat. ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ. That is the bounty of Allah. يُؤْتِيهِ مَن يَشَاءُ. He grants it to whomsoever He wants. When the banda, the slave, when the banda, the servant, attributes his virtuous state to his nafs, and he feels good now, high esteem of himself, he attributes his virtuous state to his nafs, then this slave will be guilty of showing ingratitude. He will be guilty of showing gratitude to his nafs, because he attributes all his virtues to his nafs and to himself. He will be guilty of showing gratitude to his nafs, thereby honoring his nafs. It does not behove the true mu'min to ever honor one's nafs. The true and the perfect mu'min will recite the praise of Allah. When goodness emanates from him, he will say Alhamdulillah, because Allah Ta'ala is the true actor. Allah is Al-Fa'ilul Haqiqi. In Arabic, you call Allah Al-Fa'ilul Haqiqi. He is the true doer. He is the true doer. So whenever good actions come from him, he say Alhamdulillah, because if not for you, Allah, I could not have done that. He is the creator of all actions of man, because our actions are makhluqa. The banda, the slave, is only the abode, the home of the manifestation of Allah's acts of creation. He's just the abode of manifestation of Allah's acts of creation. That's why we say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. My tongue couldn't move if Allah didn't put the power in it. My hands could not do this if Allah didn't put the power in it. I couldn't think this if Allah didn't inspire me with these good thoughts. He therefore should not attribute his virtuous deeds to his nafs. It's so easy for a person to attribute his virtuous deeds to his nafs, to himself. He starts to fall. So what's the way out? What's the way out? MashaAllah, a person is starting to do good and more good and more good and more goodness is coming from him. When he offers hamd and thana, praises to Allah Ta'ala, he will not view his virtues as the deeds of his nafs, but you'll be keeping Allah in mind. Therefore, man should not engross himself in proclaiming the praises. Astaghfirullah. Therefore, man should engross himself in proclaiming the praises of Allah. You know, when the Dajjal comes, the Dajjal is going to take so many people with him, so many Muslims with him. But there'll be two angels. On the angel on the right, when the Dajjal speaks, the angel will say, Kadhabta, you're a liar. But the Dajjal will have such power, such magic. Some say he's the son of Shaitan, Iblis himself, that the people will not hear that. They will not hear that. But the angel on the left, he will tell the angel on the right, Sadaqta, you have spoken the truth. Because Dajjal will say, I am God. But the people will hear that. He wouldn't work his magic and power at that time, and the people will hear the angel saying, what? Sadaqta, you have spoken the truth. Shaitan is really playing. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Therefore, man should engross himself in proclaiming the praises of Allah Ta'ala and perpetually keep in mind the fulfillment of the hukuk of Allah Ta'ala. He should not heed the pleasure of the nafs, that is, in ibadat and in ta'at, he should not satisfy the desire of his nafs. The desire for Jannah, salvation from Jahannam, and the sweetness in worship should not be fixed as the goals of one's pursuit. Don't fix these as your goals. Desire for Jannah. Yeah, we all want Jannah. But that shouldn't be our goal in life. Why? So if you didn't have no Jannah, then what? Allah wasn't deserved to be worshipped? You're worshipping Allah only because of the Jannah? The desire for Jannah, it's a good desire, but it's not your goal, not your object in life. It's a good desire. Desire for Jannah, desire for salvation from Jahannam, that's a good desire, to be saved from hell. Even the Prophet taught us to make dua, Allahumma ajirna minan nar, wala, save us from hell. We make dua, it's a desire, but that's not the goal. And sweetness in worship, I want to reach a stage where I could get real sweetness in my worship. Alhamdulillah, these are good things, but they are not the goals. They should not be fixed as the goals of one's pursuit. Man's only goal should be Allah, 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 and nothing else but Allah, Allah. Everything else is created. Jannat is also makhluk, creation. Jahannam is also makhluk and creation. Name and fame is what creation. Even the sweetness we enjoy, all that is makhluk. Only Allah, 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 Allah. That should be the goal. A true slave is only his master is in view. His master, my Maula, my Maula, my master. If these objects are his goals in life, his sincerity, his ikhlas will be contaminated. Sincerity is contaminated. What is the duty of the slave? The duty of the slave is to serve his master. Whether the slave gets sweetness or not, that's not his business. His business is to serve his master. He should not be motivated by personal pleasure and desires. The Shaykh, Rahimahullah, says, and very deep Shaykh he was, if there did not exist the fields of emotional, nafsani desires and pleasure, he is likening our desires and our emotions, he is likening these things to a field. You see, if there did not exist the fields of emotional, nafsani desires and pleasures, there would then not have been the journey of suluk by which the salikeen travel towards Allah Ta'ala, because there is no physical distance for you to traverse in order to reach Allah Ta'ala. So deep. If there did not exist the fields and the lands of emotional nafs and nafsani desires and pleasures, if these fields did not exist, there would not then have been the journey of suluk. That's the journey that we are undertaking right now. The journey of suluk, by which the salikeen, the travelers, those climbing the spiritual ladders, travel towards Allah. There would not have been the journey of suluk. by which the Salikin travel towards Allah Ta'ala. You know why? Because there is no physical distance. There is no physical distance for you to traverse in order to reach Allah Ta'ala. I don't have to go China. I don't have to go. It's not a physical distance. In the physical sense, there is no separation between Allah Ta'ala and yourself. Commentary of this. Literally, the meaning of suluk, because we are on the path of suluk, inshallah. The meaning of suluk is what? From the verb salaka, yasluku, which is to traverse, to journey. It means to traverse a distance, physical distance. Literally, that's what it means. In the terminology of the Sufiya Kiram, people of the hearts, suluk in their terminology means to overcome. It means to overcome and to abandon the emotional and the bestial attributes. To overcome and abandon the emotional and bestial animal qualities and attributes and desires by means of mujahada, struggle against the nafs, by means of riyadat, specially designed devotional exercises, by means of ta'at, acts of obedience, and by means of zikr of Allah. This is what suluk is about. To overcome and to abandon the emotional, bestial attributes and low qualities and desires. How? By means of mujahada, riyadat, special devotional exercises, by means of ta'at, obedience, by means of zikr. Man's domination over his nafs should reach such a degree that observance of the laws of the Sharia becomes man's nature. It becomes man's nature, and the heart remains engrossed in the zikr of Allah. When the Sharia becomes second nature, this thing is against the Sharia, I don't even feel to do it because it's against the Sharia. Man's domination over his nafs should reach such a degree that observance of the laws of the Sharia becomes man's nature, and the heart remains engrossed in the zikr of Allah Ta'ala. This stage of control, where Sharia becomes second nature, where the zikr of Allah is always in your heart, even though you're not in salat, you're not doing tasbih, you're not reading Quran, but the zikr is still here. This stage of control and domination over the nafs is also called wasl in Arabic, wasala, which means to arrive. So when you arrive, you are united, you have reached, which means having reached Allah Ta'ala, you make dua, Allahumma inni as'aluka al-wasla. Allahumma inni as'aluka al-wasla. Oh Allah, I beg you for wasl. Oh Allah, grant wasl unto me. Grant me that stage where I have reached you. This stage of control and domination over the nafs is also called wasl, which means having reached Allah Ta'ala. And that's the meaning of the journey that you undertake, which is suluk. And these are the fields that we have to travel through. It's not a physical journey, but through the fields of nafs, nafsaniyat, the shahawat, the emotions, the desires, all these fields, to traverse that distance and get to Allah by way of mujahada, controlling, dominating, by way of zikr, by way of obedience. This is the suluk and the journey. The desires and the pleasures of the nafs have been described as fields. So these are the fields. And we are the saliks, those who are journeying through these fields. And we want to get across them quickly to the other side and to reach Allah. So the desires and the pleasures of the nafs have been described as fields, because the nafs runs and operates in them. These are the fields, like how a child is running a field and play. The nafs runs and operates in these fields of pleasures and desires. If man, insan, was without nafsani desires, if he was free from nafsani desires and had no nafs in him, wow, there would not have been the spiritual journey for the salikeen. There would be no need for suluk and the spiritual journey for the salikeen, since the objective of suluk, another name for suluk is as-sayr ilallah, journeying towards Allah. The objective of suluk or sayr ilallah, journeying to Allah, objective is what? Is to subjugate, take control, dominate the desires of the nafs and bring it to the law of Allah by way of mujahada, effort, struggle. The meaning of suluk here is the spiritual sojourn or journey towards Allah and not a physical journey. The literal meaning could only be applicable if there was a physical distance between man and Allah. Physical distance between man and Allah, then the literal meaning could have been applicable if there was physical distance between man and Allah. But no, but Allah is not material. Allah is not material or physical body and form. That's why the Quran says He is closer to you than your min al-hablil warid, than your jugular vein. Similarly, the meaning of wasl with Allah, which is a good dua to make, oh Allah, grant me wasl, grant me this stage of having reached. Similarly, the meaning of wasl with Allah Ta'ala also means the subjugation of the nafsani promptings and desires. When man has reached the stage of subjugating, taking control of the nafsani promptings and desires, then he has achieved the state of wasl, which comes through mujahada. That's why these lessons do not remain only in book, but then we have 1 week to act on them and to practice them. And when we start to act on them and practice upon them, then the reality comes into us. Then Allah gives us tawfiq to do more, and Allah opens up more secrets unto us. Okay? We finish. We have one thing here, 2 sentences about to finish. The Quranic verse, the Quran says what? We are near, وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنَ الْحَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. We are nearer, says Allah, we are nearer to man than his jugular vein. This Quranic verse negates any idea of suluk being a journey in which the salik has to really traverse physical distance to reach Allahu Ta'ala. May Allah grant you and me the tawfiq to understand this and to put it into amal and to action. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Social expectation drowns us all inside. What you have should be what I want, 'cause what I have just ain't alright. The clothes I wear, the way I comb my hair, how I live, oh I don't care. This is who I am, this is me. Nothing, everything, can't you see who I am? Just let me be, 'cause like it or not, but God loves me, who I am. He said, she said, they all